Today is September 18th, 2015. The subject I am doing is women in the 50s and 60s. My name is Kelly Fisher, and my interviewee is Joanne Cooksey. Ms. Cooksey, do I have your permission to conduct this interview?
Yes, you do.
Let's begin. How old were you in the 60s?
Well, in 1960, I was 10 years old, and in 1970, I was 20. So that was most of it was my teenage years.
Were you part of the baby boom generation?
Yes, I was.
What was it like growing up in the baby boom generation?
Well, I didn't really know then that I was considered a baby boom generation. They really didn't start calling us that so much until later on, but we did have lots of kids to play with.
What was a typical day for you in the 50s and 60s?
50s and 60s, it was mainly during school, just like it is now. We got up early, went to school. We rode the bus. It was unheard of, really, almost to drive to school. Not very many people drove to school. And we had 6 periods a day, just like they do here. And then we would go home. We always had dinner at the same time every evening, and we sat down as a family to eat. It was my sister and I, it was our job to do the dishes. And we, generally, I really don't remember sitting around watching a lot of TV. We did sometimes, but most of the time it was homework, chores, that kind of thing. During the summer, we worked a lot in the garden. It was our job to mow the yard and to help out in the garden. We had chores every day to do, and so we worked around the house. And we even had to get up early on Saturday morning. My dad had been in the Navy, and he would say, "Hit the deck. It's time to get up." So we didn't get to sleep late on Saturday mornings. That was not a free day. We went to church on Sundays, and it started with, and we did have Monday was wash day, and Tuesday, we did certain things on certain days as far as chores were concerned. Okay.
Did you have any siblings or neighborhood friends?
My sister was 18 months older than I was, so definitely we were friends. We lived out in the country, and so you really didn't walk to your neighbor's house. So we had friends that lived down the road, but we didn't really have like play dates.
Well, what did you and your siblings do for entertainment?
We had lots of when we were younger, we had toys to play with, but we would go outside if it was pretty and play. And inside we did, when we were younger, I can remember playing with dolls. That was a big deal for us. And in the summertime, we went outside, and a lot of times we played in the dirt. We had a swing, my dad made the swing set, and we'd swing and fly on the trapeze. He made a trapeze for us, and we did chores.
What are some of your positive memories of school?
Oh, positive memories of school. Well, we learned a lot, and we seemed to have, we still had pep rallies back then. When I first started school, there was high schoolers at our school. It was grade 1 through 12. And so we got to go to the pep rallies, and they had the big kids. I can remember stage presentations that they would do. We would go see the school plays. I was in the band, and I loved band. I loved music. I wasn't in the band. I was a majorette. And but I played piano for the choir. And so choir performances and choir was also a big deal. So I took home ec classes, and I can remember some of my classes were really hard, and then some of them were just very interesting.
What did you wear to school?
Well, we were not allowed to wear pants. The only day we could wear pants was when we had cleanup day, and cleanup day was the day before career day. So we wore skirts and blouses and dresses and petticoats, and You know, we had to dress up. Of course, the thing about it was towards the end of the 60s was the miniskirt generation. So just like today, the administration would say, your skirt is too short. And so they would make you go home and change. So, you know, it seems like sometimes we're doing the very same thing with kids today. Their dresses are too short.
What did your family do on holidays, such as Halloween, Christmas, and Thanksgiving?
Most of the time it was like Christmas and Thanksgiving was family. We would always go to either my grandmother's house in Illinois or my grandmother's in Missouri. Halloween, we only went trick-or-treating at people's houses that we knew. The thought of going to a stranger's house and trick-or-treating was just unheard of because they tried to guess who you were. And so we always went to somebody's house that we knew, and we thought Halloween was fun. Christmas was, you know, always lots of fun. Santa would come to visit, and later on, you know, we always had a tree. We just got presents. So,
What was your favorite holiday?
oh, my favorite holiday had to be Christmas because we got presents.
Did you attend church growing up?
Yes, we always attended church. We went to Mount Zion, or I went to Millward Chapel, Cumberland Presbyterian Church as a child. Later on, we went to Margaret Hank in town. And then my mom and dad quit going to church. When I was a teenager, somebody made my dad mad. And so he just quit going to church for a while, and I started going to Mount Zion Baptist Church because that's where all my friends went. So I was in their youth group, but I always went to church.
What type of music did you listen to?
Oh, we had rock and roll. We had better music then than we do now. It wasn't bad to listen to. It always had good lyrics. It was about falling in love, and I remember those were the big days of Elvis Presley and the Supremes and a lot of good rock and roll music. And I remember when I was in the 7th grade, I was the first one to get a Beatle album because my aunt and uncle brought it to us, and they lived in Illinois. And so I remember taking it to school and we listened to the Beatles. So that was fun.
Do you still listen to that music?
No, I just listen to gospel music. Every now and then I'll turn into the oldies and goldies and listen. And you know, it's amazing you still remember the words to the songs. It's like you never forget.
Yeah. What were the fashion trends back then?
Well, I think I said that before. We had, you couldn't wear pants, so you had a skirt everywhere you went. Not as many dresses, sometimes mostly skirts and blouses. But then it got to be mini skirts, and I know my mom, she was very strict about we couldn't have our, you know, skirts. It had to be at the top of the knee, and that was as short as we could go. And of course, the nice part about being in middle school, you got to wear high heels when you got into high school, so couldn't wait to wear high heels.
Where did you go shopping for your clothes?
Well, my grandmother made most of my clothes. Every year I would get a skirt and sweater from Drivers, and that was in downtown Paducah. And I might buy a coat at Brights or Jeans, but everything else my grandmother made.
How did you do your hair?
Oh, my mom always made me get a permanent. So it was short and curly because I got a permanent. So my hair was always short and curly.
What were the movies like?
Well, for one thing, they were clean, decent. We didn't have R-rated movies back then. You didn't cuss on television. You didn't use foul language in movies. There wasn't bedroom scenes. Everybody slept in twin beds. My grandmother, a lot of times, we went to every Doris Day movie that was ever produced. She loved Doris Day, so Grandma would take us to the movies sometimes in the afternoon. I never went to the movies with my mom and dad. My grandmother took us to the movies, or that was it. You know, it seemed like mom and dad worked, and if they went to the movies, they went, and, you know, we got to stay home. So Anyway, so, but they were good love stories. But you have to understand that was the era of Gone with the Wind and How the West Was Won, and some of those big epic, the Ten Commandments, and so they were fantastic. I do remember my mom and dad took my sister and I to St. Louis to see How the West Was Won on the great big 3-screen movie screen, and so that was special. Probably cost them a lot too, but I don't know. It was worth it.
What were your favorite type of movies?
Oh, like I said, they were love stories because that's what my grandmother wanted to go watch. So that's usually what we, Rock Hudson. Oh, we always went to Elvis Presley's movies too. Elvis Presley, Doris Day, Rock Hudson, Jerry Lewis. Funny movies.
Did you drive in the 60s?
Yes, I got my license in 1966, and my first car was a 1959 Thunderbird. So, yeah, I like driving.
Do you remember how much gas was back then?
Most of the time that I remember, it was 25 cents a gallon, because I know we could go to Paducah and back on $1 worth of gas.
What were the roles of women?
Well, there was women's work and there was men's work. The women did the housework and they raised the kids, and the men took care of the yard and the cars, and that was pretty much. There was a good separation of, I don't ever remember my dad cleaning house or helping with the dishes or any of that stuff. That was women's work. So he didn't. And my mom was one of those most unusual people in the 50s. In 1952, she started working out at Union Carbide. And so I was one of the very few kids in school that their mother worked. And so, that was, but my mom always worked and my grandmother lived with us, so she took care of us while Mom was at work.
It's very interesting. Did women have the same rights back then as they do now?
Well, I think they had the same rights. They did not get equal pay. But back then, they got to vote and they could own property. I'm not sure they could have a credit card. But I'm sure, it was mainly the man was the head of the household, and then, the woman was not.
How did you feel about women being in the workforce?
Well, like I said, my mom was one of those few ladies that worked all the time that I could remember. She went to work. And so it was considered unusual, because I know a lot of times I would ask my mom, Mom, how come you can't be a room mother and come to school during the parties? And she would say, but I work. And so then a lot of times my grandmother would take me to ball practice or come pick me up. Well, we didn't do so much picking up after school. You didn't do a whole lot on school nights. Maybe you did on the weekends, but there wasn't a lot of activities on school nights. So there wasn't even that many ball games on school nights.
Some of the basic goals of the 60s for females consisted of equal pay for equal work, an end to domestic violence, curtailment of severe limits on women in managerial jobs, an end to sexual harassment, and sharing of responsibilities for housework and child rearing. Which do you think was the most important in your opinion?
Well, considering you lived a sheltered life, you didn't know, and I didn't know there was such a thing as sexual harassment when I was in school. I didn't know that there was such a thing as spouse abuse or child abuse. Nobody talked about it. Very seldom did we even talk about divorce. That was a big no-no. That was a scandal if you got divorced. And so from my point of view, it would be equal. I mean, it was sharing the household duties, because, like I said, Mom did, we did our girls' work and Dad did his work. So I think it was sharing kind of the household duties, I guess, in my opinion. I mean, that was the only thing. I didn't really realize that women didn't get the same pay. Hey, we were teenagers back then.
Mm-hmm. How would you compare the life of a teenage girl in the 60s to the life of a teenage girl now?
Well, number one, teenage girls back then, where they weren't sexually active, you got a bad reputation, and so you wanted to protect your reputation. I think parents said more about, say no to sex and drugs. I mean, well, I didn't even see or hear of drugs. Then, there was alcohol, but so today's teenage girls, they have a lot of pressure sexually, drugs, alcohol, smoking. It's okay to have a baby and come to school. Back then, if you got pregnant, you couldn't go to school. You had to quit school. And so a lot has changed for teenage girls. We still like the boys, though.
What were your views on the Vietnam War?
Well, the Vietnam War was a big deal back when I was in high school because, matter of fact, I still have the 1968 newspaper of where all the draft numbers came out, because I graduated in 1968, and it was my schoolmates that one number decided whether they were going to go to Vietnam or not. And so it really touched home, because some of them, they had low numbers and they had to go to the Vietnam War and they didn't have a choice. And some of them, they were lucky to get a real high number and they were never called. So some of them, went to Canada and Mexico to escape the draft. Some of them joined the National Guard so they wouldn't have to go to Vietnam. So it was definitely a big deal.
Did any family members of yours fight in the Vietnam War?
No, I didn't have any brothers. And fortunately, most of my cousins, they weren't drafted. And so they didn't have to go, or they were in college. My husband, his number was called and he failed his physical. And so they said, well, we'll check back with you in a few months. And so because he knew that he would probably pass his physical the next time, he went ahead and joined the National Guard. So.
What did you think of President Nixon?
He was president. Didn't really know much about Watergate until I got a little bit older, and it wasn't as widespread as a teenager. I just knew he resigned, and that it was because of Watergate. And so, about the main thing I knew about Watergate was that we made Watergate cake and we had Watergate salad, and everybody made fun of President Nixon and Watergate. But, he was president.
Do you remember when John F. Kennedy died?
Yes, I do. And I remember I was with my grandmother in downtown Paducah when we heard that he had been shot and that he had died. And for some reason, we were out of school that day. I don't know whether it was an in-service or election day or exactly what it was. But anyway, we were out of school because that's why we were downtown shopping. But yeah, you remember when you heard that news. Then everybody gathered around the TVs and you sat and watched it, just like we did 9/11.
How did the death of John F. Kennedy affect your life or the environment around you?
I think it made you think that, that all of a sudden we were vulnerable, that, somebody that was in a high position could get assassinated and murdered. For us girls, we were really emotional about it. A lot of us cried, over the death of a president. So it was kind of tough.
Do you remember Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing on the moon?
Well, yes, and actually, believe it or not, we didn't have a TV in every room at school, and so we all gathered in one room and watched it as it landed on the moon, as they took their first step. And so we even all got together in a room just to watch the launching, of the first one. And so yeah, it was a big deal.
How did you feel?
Well, it was exciting because, you figured that was a whole new territory, that eventually that was the big deal, that, well, we landed on the moon, and so next thing they would do, they would have colonies on the moon. And of course we had TV shows that depicted, Lost in Space and that sort of thing. So it was like something that you figured that in the future you would live like the Jetsons.
How did the civil rights movement make you feel about human rights and race?
When I was in school, the first black student attended Heath High School. And at first it didn't bother me. It seemed like it was just odd that he was there. But as it turned out, he was a good basketball star. And so he was nice and tall and played good basketball, so everybody thought that was pretty good. And then later on, we had a few more, and so hopefully we didn't treat them any different than we did any other student. It just came to be part of your everyday life that they were there. I can remember them having separate black schools. And then all of a sudden they were told they couldn't go to that school and they had to start going to our school. I think a lot of people might have been upset, but as far as the students, we thought it was okay. Didn't see any problems with it. And I know there were a lot of people that died. I remember the deal about Rosa Parks and not, refusing to move her seat on the bus. I remember the pictures of the riots. I remember you didn't go to Cairo because there was a lot of riots back then, and it was kind of scary driving through Cairo, Illinois. But I think we all pretty much agreed that they needed equal rights, that it was just something that needed to be done, but we didn't think violence was a way to do it. Nobody likes violence.
Well, thank you for your time, Miss Cooksey. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Hey, man, it's like a trip in the past. Do you remember this? Oh, yes. I see that all the time on Facebook. Do you remember what this was? Do you remember what that was? And I always remember. So, those were the good old days.
Thank you.
Yeah.